All right, so today we're going to be talking about 4.4, the different types of memories. This is going to be kind of a basic introduction for what memories are. We are going to talk about some important stuff like the process for memory formation that you'll definitely have to understand, as well as a couple different types of memories. So let's get into it. Some biggies, right? The basic information. If you got to know, like before we can get into anything else, is just what is memory, right? So memory is in the field of psychology. It's this learning that we do over time through encoding, storage, and retrieval. We're going to talk about what all those three things are. This is oftentimes associated with consciousness, right? Our ability to think back on our memories that we were conscious for and process those things, our awareness, our personality, all of those kind of play into who we are. And our memories play a huge part of that. It's our brain's storage of information, right? Kind of both conscious and unconscious. So those three big terms there, encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is kind of the creation of memories. It's the process we go through to create a memory, acquiring information into our memory system, again, whether that's conscious or unconscious. Storage is the process of retaining coded information. You can create a short-term memory that lasts for 30 seconds, but it's not going to be stored into your memory long term, right? Think about what you were wearing yesterday. You can probably remember that. But 2 years from now, if I ask you, what were you wearing on November the 29th, you're probably not going to remember that. So it's not stored, it's just encoded for a bit. And then retrieval is me asking you that question, asking you to go back into your storage and pull information out. So you've got to be able to do all three, understand all three of those when it comes to memory and what it is. So that process that we're going through of encoding, storage, and retrieval, the way that looks was first laid out by the psychologists Atkinson and Shiffrin in 1968. And this is really a three-step process, is what you all should know, right? Is that for us to record information, things start as a quick sensory memory. Okay, so whether it be something we saw, something we felt, something we tasted, something we smelled, or heard, anything like that. So we create a quick sensory memory, and then we process that in our short-term memory, where if we rehearse it enough, we encode it, and it becomes something that is more stored. And that happens by moving it into our long-term memory for us to be able to rehearse later, for us to go back into later and find that information, pull that out. So sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. If we're going to use that same example, right, going sensory memory is you look in the mirror and you see what you look like today and see what clothes you are wearing. Your short-term memory holds on to that, right, for about 30 seconds. If you, however, rehearse it and think about it, or you experience it enough, then you're likely to remember it. If I asked you to every 30 minutes for this tip for all of today, remind yourself what you wore yesterday. And if you probably rehearsed every day, maybe put an alarm in your phone every day when you wake up, say, what was I wearing on the 29th? You could easily remember that. But a year from now, if you don't practice like that, it isn't going to be in your long-term memory and you will have forgotten it. So we've got to have sensory memory, a sensation, short-term memory where we encode it by rehearsing and kind of going over and to be able to remember that. And then finally it gets moved to our long-term memory. More recently though, really in the last 20 years, the short-term memory has kind of been revamped a little bit in the way that we understand that, and that it's not just like this automatic process where we go through short-term memory. It's now gets oftentimes referred to in psychology today is this not short-term memory, but a working memory. This implies that it is an active process. Right, that our short-term memory is it's not just kind of hanging out there. It's our memory where if we aren't working on it, it's not going to become a long-term memory. Think of it, this is like the warehouse or the workshop, right? Short-term memory is not just a big building where you're putting stuff in there. It's more of a workshop. It's active. It's not just storing stuff. It's where we have to be working on things to create long-term memories. So this is us rehearsing that either visually or auditory, right? Thinking through in our mind, trying to remember the way that we did this, right? Thinking through the process, whatever it takes. But a biggie here is that it requires us to focus. Focused attention is critical for memory formation. Right? For us to create these memories, we need to be focusing on that, right? It has to be something that we're thinking about in some way, right? For this to be that form of kind of explicit memory that we are creating. So that memory formation looks something like this. External event, right, gives us that sensory input. It kind of goes into this general sensory memory. And it then, if we are paying attention to whether it is important or novel, we then kind of encode that into our working or short-term memory. And there's where we have to do that rehearsal, right? We have to practice. We have to say it to ourselves. Things like note cards are a form of rehearsal. It's basically practicing and reminding, going over that information over and over and over again. Think about like your social security number or your phone number, right? How did you learn that? You rehearsed it. You put that 7-digit or 9-digit code into your head, and you rehearsed it. You went over it over and over and over and over and over again. And so you rehearsed that. That then encodes into your long-term memory storage, and it will slowly decay there. We'll talk about forgetting later, unless we retrieve it and work on it again, right? Think about like, this is a bad example because you all don't have to do this. When I was a kid, I knew all of my best friends' phone numbers, right? Nobody had cell phones. Nobody had things that just like stored numbers. I had to remember their numbers. And so anytime I wanted to call my friends, I would go to our phone and I would just dial it because I knew all their numbers. And I remember in late high school, once we had phones, or even in college, I still remembered all their numbers. I don't remember their number now. It was definitely in my long-term memory for a while, but now I haven't pulled it out of my memory. I have not retrieved it and worked on it or rehearsed it. So it's no longer encoded in my long-term memory. That memory is gone. Right? But things that like my social security number that, a couple times a year I have to pull out of my long-term memory and use it on something like a form, that's more likely for me to remain in my long-term memory forever, right? Because I have to keep using it. But even that, if I went 40 years without it, from now, I probably wouldn't remember it then because I wouldn't have practiced it. And so this is that like effortful processing that requires our focused attention. We'll talk a little bit later about how there is some automatic processing of things that kind of skip this step, and something happens and it just automatically creates a memory. So short-term and working memory, what this looks like. A couple different things you need to know. While we are rehearsing, while we're going over things, some psychologists, like for instance George Miller, found that humans really only remember 7 numbers, right? Plus or minus 2, so between 5 and 9 bits of information at one time. If I were to just read off a 10-digit code to you all, there's a good chance you're only going to remember between 5 and 9 of those on average. Right? We'll do a little bit of practice with that in class just to see. But that is, and I guess this is important to note as well, and that's only if nothing distracts us. Right. So Miller studies showed that like if you had someone over there trying to talk to you, you wouldn't remember it at all. If you're like really focused on hearing and trying to encode that into your short-term memory, you're not going to be able to do that for more than 10 numbers unless you're really, really focusing. So more research has agreed. It's 7 numbers, 6 letters, and 5 words, 5 random words. If the words have meaning, they're more easier to remember, but 5 random words. Sensory memory, those 5 sensations that we have, and we use those to create memories. Those are what are feeding our working memory. And these kind of gives us that sense of flow, continuity to experiences that otherwise would be really, really confusing, right? Our sensory memory, a creation of those memories, helps our memories make sense. It's so that whenever you have a memory, you're not just remembering the smell of something. Oftentimes you're associating a couple different things together. So these look like either iconic or echoic. Iconic memories are a momentary sense of memory of visual stimuli. This is one specific form compared to echoic memory, and this is more auditory stimuli. And if I'm giving you rapid information, right, if you're just creating in these short-term or working memory, this is not formation of long-term memories, short-term or working memories. Iconic doesn't last very long at all. It only lasts about half a second, whereas echoic tends to last 3 to 4 seconds. right? So if I say one word, it'll last, if you're without much focused attention or even with focused attention, that one word will last about 3 to 4 seconds, that echoic memory, right? You've got about 3 to 4 seconds to process everything that happened and rehearse it. Otherwise, it's gone. Whereas a visual, something that you see, it only lasts, if I pump up a bunch of information on the screen, you're only going to be able to remember it for about half a second if you try to, and without any rehearsal. So other forms of explicit or declarative, also known as declarative memories, meaning that like you can declare the facts that you know, right? I declare that I was born on April 10th, 1990. That is a fact or a memory, something that I have learned. So we have semantic and episodic. These are semantic memories. What I just stated, my birthday, that's a fact. It's a declarative memory, just something that I learned. Anything that you learn in school. Right now, learning the difference between semantic and episodic memory is creating a semantic memory, right? It's creating these factual events and memories. So it's not, memories are not just right, experiences that we have. It is purely our semantic memories. Remembering how many football players are on the field at a time. You know that's 11. Trivia questions, anything that you know like this. Facts. Episodic are our experiences, personal experiences, events. Right, taking the ACT. I still remember every time, all 4 of the different times that I took the ACT, and like what I don't know what I was wearing those days, but I do remember the different places that I took it, and the people that I sat around, and things like that. Specific events that we remember. This is also known as autobiographical, or stuff that happened to us, right? And so we process both of these similarly, where we rehearse. Episodic can tend to have other things that make it more potent to us remember. These are known as like flashbulb memories, but semantic memories, the factual ones, these we oftentimes have to process and really work on to remember. Think about flashcards, think about vocab. These aren't things you just automatically get put in your brain. You have to work to remember those. Implicit memories, these are known as non-declarative memories. We retain information outside of our consciousness. These are a little more interesting. So these are things like procedures that we know how to do. Things like riding a bike, driving, right? I don't consciously think I need to turn the wheel 90 degrees to the right. I need to turn my blinker on anymore. Like I've been driving for 14 years. I know how to do that. Tying your shoes. You don't think through the process. You just do it. It's automatic. So a lot of times these are stored in rather the cerebellum for long-term memory, but some even in our long-term other portions of our cortex as well. And then classically conditioned associations. We'll talk about this in our next unit. And these forms of associations or learned associations are things that we learn over the course of our lives. Right? Phobias, attitudes towards various groups. Talked about like the little Albert study where the psychologist banged pots and pans and pipes behind the child every time he saw a small white bunny or mouse. And so he developed a terrible fear. And so that was that's still known as a memory, right? It's procedural memory, a classically conditioned association. It's implicit, it's automatic. He didn't like work on it. He didn't in his brain tell himself, I got to remember that rats are scary. I got to remember that rats are scary. He created an association automatically. His brain did that. So associations that happen automatically are implicit forms of memory. And then priming is another kind of form of implicit memory. These are formed very similar to associations, but when we form these associations in any way, oftentimes any form of association there can you be used as a form of priming. Terror management theory, an interesting way of thinking about that, like studies have shown that people react and take studies very differently if right before they take the study you remind them of their mortality in some way, right? And that could be something as simple as reminding someone that this amount of people die in a car accident every day. You will be driving home. Something really simple like that. Make people think about and recognize their own mortality. Have people go through a process of planning out, ask them questions about funeral homes and where they want to be buried or anything like that. They found that people were much more much less compassionate and much less empathetic whenever they went through this. They were much more selfish in their decision making. They were more aggressive towards others. There were a lot of really interesting findings of how just by being told about and to think about your death primes people to react in very interesting ways. So we can be primed with all kinds of things. So last thing today is how this is encoding. We've talked about this a little bit, this process for encoding. Reminder that it's dual track, it's parallel. We're not just processing things automatically, as you see here see here at the top, right? This automatic processing where we see something and it gets put in our memory. That is the automatic processing, right? Implicit memories happen in this automatic processing, whereas explicit memories require this effortful processing here at the bottom, processing in which we have to put some strain into it. We have to rehearse to be able to remember things, to be able to know what an explicit and implicit memory is in creation of that fact, of that semantic information, semantic memory. You have to rehearse, right? You don't just automatically process that. Right? There are people that do, but for the most part, the rest of us, we have to rehearse and practice in order to put this information into our long-term memory and create a memory with it. And though we are able to do this one thing, right, creation of one form, we are oftentimes processing our memories on both the conscious and unconscious level. Dual processing, dual track encoding. Even while we're automatically processing one thing, we can also be rehearsing and working on creating other memories. Studies have shown that we aren't good at doing this, right? Working on long-term memories or semantic information while working on multiple other effortful processing, but we can automatic process while effortful. So you can't work on 3 different things at once, effortful forms of processing, but we can do an effortful and an automatic at the same time. So that's that for the day. A lot of vocab review, a lot of stuff like that, a lot of similar terms. I'd go back and review, look through your textbook for this information, make sure you know the difference between the different types of processing, implicit, explicit, effortful versus automatic, semantic, right? Lots and lots of different types of memories. So take a look back, review those, and I'll see you in class.